This video is going to have a pretty lengthy introduction. The PlayStation Portable has, essentially since launch, been a great way to play some quality games on the go. The homebrew scene took action the same year of its release. From that point into many years forward, it would provide the best way to play games on the go. Who could argue that with emulators of what were at the time current handhelds being readily available on the system? During the Game Boy Advance's lifetime, you could technically pirate games that came out the day before and play them on the go via the PSP. Not like you'd ever do such a thing, right? It was around the time of the PSP 2000 model where the modding scene seemed to be reaching its peak. By mid to late 2007, having a PSP without being modded was becoming uncommon. At least that was my experience in middle school, where all of us rebellious kids would hide from the teachers somewhere at recess to watch downloaded YouTube poops, the Laser Collection, and Sparta remixes over and over. Of course, once that got a bit tame, we'd start emulating some classic systems like the Super Nintendo, and by what seemed like magic, even the Nintendo 64. You'd also find us playing some quality PlayStation 1 games we ripped and converted ourselves using some sketchy PBP editor software. Man, back in the day, we felt like elite hackers. It often became a bit of a competition to see who could get the craziest things to play on it. I still remember someone trying to tell me there will probably be an Xbox emulator for the PSP eventually. Didn't help when people used screen recording software or just put a video on the thing to try and convince people about these obvious lies. Still, I never fell for these. I mean, usually they were pretty obvious. Hopefully you enjoyed my little introduction. It was somewhat of a motive to finally get around to this video. In today's video, we'll be going through each generation of gaming in terms of its emulation capabilities on the PSP. As of today, we still have hundreds of thousands of games to try emulating, spanning between 6 generations of gaming history, from the 2nd to at the latest the 7th. Of course, the later generations consist mostly of weaker systems, like for example the handheld consoles from these eras. Between the lines, some of these systems might not run the best on PSP hardware. Most projects by now have been abandoned, but some still see the light of day, such as the Nintendo 64 emulator, which had an update released quite recently as of this video. Of course, a lot of the efforts are also aimed towards the PS Vita, which have been more popularly exploited with an easier hack that came out last year, allowing PS Vita owners to seamlessly hack their Vitas without the worry of breaking their console. The Vita homebrew scene has managed to unlock PSP capabilities in the system. As such, it seems like everything you could do on the PSP you can now do on a PS Vita, and if there are any exceptions to that, I've yet to run into them. Essentially, this homebrew app has the ability to turn your PS Vita into a PSP and back again in seconds. So everything we'll be taking a look at today will be fully functional on the PS Vita. At least, I assume it should. I haven't tested everything on it, but again, my experience with cross-compatibility has been nothing but pristine. Maybe I'd consider using the Vita for this video, if the thing had an official way to capture footage from it. Luckily, such a peripheral was released for the PSP, being the component cables. We're about to really delve into today's topic, but I do want to mention a few other things as briefly as I can before we do. I have a few things to say universally about PSP emulation. Many of these will require you own system BIOS files in order to make them work. This is more or less like how Windows or Mac is to your computer. These files can be found online, but whether it's legal or not to download them has always seemed to be left up for debate. It'd also be smart to say that a lot of these emulators made primary use of the circle button for executing commands and the cross button to go back. This, I believe, is due to regional differences, as in some locations the circle button was used to enter rather than the cross. And lastly, there's the home button. A lot of emulators have their own exit buttons programmed into the menus because for whatever reason, exiting the game by typical means can soft lock the console, which means it gets stuck in this state and you have to reset. I don't know why that is, but you should know before going in to check for an exit button in the emulator, because you might regret going the traditional way if it doesn't support it. Finally, after much delay, it's time we delve into PSP emulation, starting with the 2nd generation of video games. I'm running firmware 6.60 Pro C2 on my Pearl White PSP Go for all gameplay footage. This time I'll be able to use a PlayStation 3 controller. This XMB doesn't look quite right. It looks just fine on the PSP Go itself, but projected on the screen, the HUD elements are definitely off the mark. Oh well, that's not important. Let's see what we've got for the 2nd generation of gaming on PSP in order of console release.